Jupiter and Saturn are like flip sides of the same coin. So what happens when they form a rare sextile? Well, you get one of astrology's greatest odd couples, next on Horoscope Highlights.
Hey, it's officially Instant Insights Week. We have astrologers ready to answer any of your astrology questions. They can be about love, finances, career, health, basically anything you can think of. Maybe you have a conversation that you've been meaning to have with your boss, and maybe it's your partner. We have an astrologer that can help you with that. Maybe you're planning a trip and you want to make sure it goes smoothly. We have an astrologer for that too. Or who knows, maybe you have a medical procedure that is super important and you really want to make sure that it goes well. Well, you already know what I'm gonna say. To talk to an astrologer, all you have to do is go to astrologyhub.com/connect and look for an astrologer with a little green light. If they have a green light, it means that you can call them. And also, a little bonus, any reading happening this week has the first 5 minutes for free. So if you have a question that happens to be able to be answered in 5 minutes or less, you're in luck. All you have to do again is go to astrologyhub.com/connect and you're all set. All right, I'll see you there.
Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I would like to talk to you about a rare Jupiter-Saturn sextile taking place on June 19th. Now, you may recall that Jupiter and Saturn are quite adverse entities in the astrological pantheon. These are two planets who very much do not get along. Jupiter is a benefic. It's associated with good fortune and higher purpose. It's a bright light in the heavens, and it shines and sends its rays of benevolence to all of us below. Jupiter is not only the planet of good fortune and higher purpose, it's also a patron and protector. A protector because it's the largest of all the planets orbiting the sun. A protector because its gravitational pull pulls into its orbit all the asteroids and meteorites that would have slammed into us long ago. One could say that the reason the planet Earth is still orbiting the sun today is because of the orbit of Jupiter and its gravitational pull, that it pulls all of the objects that could have smashed into us, and instead they smash into what is basically an impregnable planet, the planet Jupiter. Saturn is on the other side of the coin from Jupiter. If Jupiter is a benefic, Saturn is a malefic. A malefic, basically, is a planet whose light is not as shining and bright as the benefics are. Venus and Jupiter you can see right away in the nighttime sky, but malefics have a compromised glow. Mars is a malefic because of its red and ruddy complexion, and Saturn is a malefic because its light is faded and it takes a very long time to limp across the sky. So Jupiter you can think of as the hand that giveth, and Saturn you can think of as the hand that taketh away. And in many astrological books, Jupiter will be associated with good fortune and Saturn will be associated with bad fortune. Now, if you've been watching some of these episodes, you know that that's not really the case, but that's pretty much the reputation that the two planets have. So the two planets are going to be forming a very rare sextile on June 19th. It doesn't happen every year. It doesn't even happen every few years. And the particular zodiac signs that they're forming their sextile in are Pisces and Taurus, and that's even rarer than a regular sextile would be. So this sextile, what is a sextile in astrology? A sextile in astrology is seen as being a very positive aspect. It's a very positive relationship between the planets. Planets don't necessarily have one set relationship with one another in the sky. In fact, as they orbit around the sun and go around the circle of the horoscope itself, they create and uncreate relationships all the time. They come together, maybe in an antagonistic way, or maybe they come together in a sort of indifferent way, or maybe they come together in a, hey, oh, good fellow, it's wonderful to see you sort of way. So a sextile A sextile, although it's not quite "Hail, good fellow, it's wonderful to see you," a sextile is basically two planets deciding to put away their differences and to work together. All right, so they're not really the best of friends when they're in sextile with one another, but they have a very constructive relationship that they're going to form. They might have a mutual purpose or a need that needs to be fulfilled, and one planet is going to help the other planet out in their pursuit of a particular objective, or even the simple pursuit of happiness. So, what happens when you see Jupiter and Saturn forming a sextile, like the one that they're going to be forming on June 19th? This is a pairing, actually, of the two. And what comes to mind when I think of this sextiling energy between what can be a very sort of constrictive and control freaky Saturn and a very sort of laid back and live and let live sort of Jupiter, what you can have here is what used to be called back in the day an arranged marriage. Arranged marriages have lasted much longer than marriages for love and romance have. In fact, arranged marriages were pretty much the way that marriages were done for a number of centuries. But in an arranged marriage, one person could be pledged to another, usually as children, or one was a child and one might have been much older. And so these matches were arranged by families based on some kind of financial gain or social improvement. And in an arranged marriage, basically the two people would meet on their wedding day, whether they were from royalty from foreign countries or whether they were from the neighboring village. They would meet together on the wedding day, and you basically had to make the best of what you saw. Hopefully the person was attractive, maybe if not physically, then maybe personality-wise or something like that. But it was a bit of a gamble, and it was a bit of a long shot. Many arranged marriages basically did their basic duties of having children and raising families and things like that. But why I call the Jupiter-Saturn sextile like an arranged marriage is, at first the reception may be chilly between the two planets, but over time, they sort of take a liking to one another. Jupiter, when it forms a sextile to Saturn, they have a way of just kind of like, they may never be passionate or in love with one another, but there is a love. There is a bond that forms over a period of time, which is why I referred to these sextiles as being an arranged marriage. They might not start out in love, but they definitely wind up being very loving and very bonding to one another, particularly in the zodiac signs of Taurus. Jupiter's in Taurus, and Pisces. Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Pisces. So, what this puts me in mind of is a wonderful television show that I used to watch in the 1970s. Okay, I know I'm dating myself here, but a wonderful television show that I used to watch in the 1970s. And this show was called The Odd Couple. The television series, The Odd Couple, was based on a Broadway play written by Neil Simon. It was then made into a movie with, I think it's Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. But what made it really popular was the television series that starred Jack Klugman and Tony Randall. Jack Klugman played Oscar Madison, who was this kind of slovenly sports writer, and Tony Randall played Felix Unger, who always appeared in the latest fashion. Usually his appearance was very fastidious. It was a three-piece suit with a properly knotted Windsor knot tie. And so where Oscar was like a sports writer who wore, basically any pullover sweatshirt that was handy and chinos or comfortable slacks. This is 1970s. Felix was a photographer. I think it was actually an advertising photographer. He was a photographer. The Odd Couple had one of the most famous sequences on television. It was immediately recognizable from its theme song. The theme song had this sort of plodding, lumbering quality to it. And then you would hear this voiceover begin, and it was a fellow, and he would say, on November 13th, Felix Unger was asked to remove himself from his place of residence. That request came from his wife. And you would see Felix, all dapper in his three-piece suit and an overcoat, walking dismally outside the front door of his apartment, holding suitcases. And I think he even had like an overcoat, like a raincoat or something like that. And the door slams behind him and he looks sort of forlornly back over one shoulder. The door opens up. He kind of like looks hopeful for a moment. And then a woman's hand comes through the doorway and it's holding a saucepan. And she's, like this. And he takes the saucepan and the door slams again. So that's the opening. It sort of, sets up this kind of like miserable man who really doesn't want to be thrown out of his apartment or his marriage being sent away. And so the music continues. And as does the narration, it says, deep down, he knew she was right. But he also knew that someday he would return to her. But with nowhere else to go, he appeared at the home of his friend Oscar Madison. Several years earlier, Madison's wife had thrown him out, requesting that he never return. So Felix, with his saucepan and his suitcases, shows up at Oscar's apartment in New York. And the door opens and Oscar's like, happy to see him. He's kind of like, he's actually not waving because what he's doing is that he's holding these grocery bags full of garbage. Okay, and he's got a sports hat that's skewed on one side of his head, and he's wearing a jersey top and things like that. So he's like, hey, and he's like, hi, nice to see you, Felix. And he reaches out to shake Felix's hand, and Felix, sort of stands back, and Oscar realizes that his hand is grimy from the garbage, so he sort of wipes it off on maybe the side of a milk carton that's protruding out of these sacks. And he reaches into his pocket and produces an apartment key and hands it to Felix. And so then the narrative voice picks up again and asks the great question, can two divorced men share an apartment without driving each other crazy? And then the music picks up, dun 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 dun, and it shows Felix and Oscar coming out of their New York apartment. They're in front of the door under the awning, probably hailing a cab or something like that. Going to work, and Oscar's got a cigar already that's half smoked, and he throws it on the ground, and Felix looks at it, like, how could you litter? And he takes his umbrella, he's carrying a coat over one arm, and he takes his umbrella and he stabs the cigar butt and he whips it back up, and presents it back into Oscar's face, like, here, throw it away properly, And then they go this marvelous split screen where Oscar's in Midtown Manhattan in the 70s. And so, there's like a call girl with big, blonde hair or whatever walking down the street and sashaying. And he's kind of like looking at her like, yeah, wow, And then, you cut to Felix, who's also in Midtown Manhattan, and there's traffic and people looking around. There's this old lady with a purse who's, looking to cross the street, and Felix offers to help her across the street. Well, and they're going on juxtaposed in a split screen. And so Oscar, ogles the lady who sort of like waves and keeps on walking, and he steps into cement that's been newly put down, and the cement mason gets up and starts yelling at him, and Felix, offering to help the old lady across the street. She looks at him, this is 1970s New York. New York was bankrupt during this time. She looks at him like he's grabbing her purse, and she takes her purse and she starts beating him over the head. It's such a fantastic beginning. And it shows the juxtaposition of these two personalities. And it reminded me so much of how Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Taurus work. With Jupiter, the Oscar Madison character, you've got someone who's like, he's really laid back. He's really relaxed in his appearance. He's a sports writer, which is very Jupiterian. He loves poker nights and to gamble, and he eats excessively, and he never cleans up after himself, and he probably lives on takeout. So there's kind of Jupiterian quality here. But what's also nice about it is that he's Felix's friend. And so Felix has been thrown out. He's been exiled. And he opens up his apartment to Felix and he welcomes him in. He's like, hey, buddy, come here, hang out as long as you need to. And what you see there are the wonderful Jupiterian qualities of acceptance of what someone's situation is, hospitality. He's opening up his home to Felix. Obviously, Felix is going to have to pay his part of the rent and things like that, but he's opening up his home to Felix, and he's a port in the storm for Felix. Okay, these are all Jupiter qualities, the idea of friendliness, the bonhomie, the opening up the home and sharing it, and being a port of the storm, being a kind of sanctuary for someone who's been cast out. These are all qualities that we see in the planet Jupiter. And then what we also see in Jupiter and Taurus is that, again, that relaxed quality, accepting him for who he is, and just bringing him on into his life. All right. Now, with Felix, you see the Saturnine qualities. Felix right away is a much more melancholic, depressive figure of the two of them. He's a bit of a hypochondriac, always reacting to the slightest ailment or something like that that's going on in his body. I remember that Tony Randall, who played him on the series, would do these honking noises really loudly of having sinus infections and things like this. But Felix, nevertheless, is the one who cooks. He keeps a tidy household, and he's always reprimanding Oscar. And so he's being very Saturn on Oscar's Jupiter. He's reprimanding him, telling him to brush up, clean up, and take care of things. And he brings control and routine and discipline to the household, which was wildly out of control and very undisciplined before. But what you also see in Felix's character, where Oscar is kind of like, maybe divorce isn't a bad idea. He's living the life and he's enjoying the company of people and he's having a pretty good time. Felix, the divorce is painful. It's very clear why his wife threw him out. He was too painstaking, too controlling, too critical, and didn't know how to be lenient or to yield. And she just had her fill of him and threw him out. So that's why he's been thrown out. And as I said, you have those Saturnian qualities showing up. You've got someone who's very much a control freak. You have someone who is a depressive, and you have someone who has been exiled. Okay, and this idea of the exiles we've discussed in previous episodes is very much associated to Saturn. Okay, so he's been thrown out. They're roommates, and they're now going to live together. And that's basically how this sextile works. Okay, now, not every day of your life under the sextile. And basically, the energy of the sextile would be predominant for the next year. Although Jupiter and Saturn approach a sextile with one another, they don't really form a complete one. And that will be about a year from now. But during this period of time, what's going to be interesting is to sort of think of these two planets as roommates. Okay. And they might even represent different aspects of you, or different aspects of the way that you approach life, or a relationship that is currently going on in your life. Something in which difficult circumstances have put you together with someone else or put you in a particular situation, an exile situation. Maybe it's a separation in your own marriage. Maybe it parallels the plot, or maybe it's an in-between job, or a venture, or an enterprise, or you're in some sort of transitional state, which would be very much in keeping with Saturn being in the mutable sign of Pisces. So maybe it's a situation that it's not out of your choice, that you've been cast out of a previous situation. You have to make the most of this situation. There might be some bitterness or resentment or guilt or self-recrimination that goes along with this, but there's going to also be a benevolent figure. Okay, a benevolent force. This might be a coworker who at first gets on your nerves because they're so optimistic or benevolent or something like that. But over a period of time, they begin to rub off on you. They begin to make you feel accepted. They begin to make you feel welcome. They begin to make you feel supported in some way. And so that might be something that appears or emerges over the next 12 months. What is also happening is that there may be a Saturnian figure in your life. Maybe you're the one who's been lackadaisical or too casual, or, live and let live. And there's a Saturnian figure that's appeared in your life. Maybe it's a boss, a supervisor, coworker, friend, loved one, sibling, who's been tossed out of their family in some regard. That basically, this person gets on your nerves. They're always critical, or they're correcting something, or something along those lines. But over a period of time, you become shaped by them. You begin to appreciate things that, if you want to get somewhere with yourself, you have to lift your sights. You have to perhaps put in the work or the energy. You have to not be distraught when you're dealt a setback, but actually to take the setback in stride and to find a way to turn that setback into something that moves you forward again. So it's going to be some kind of situation in your life that appears that might be reinforced by circumstances in some way, an unlikely friend or an unlikely ally or an unlikely associate, someone that you really wouldn't have had much to do with before, or given your druthers wouldn't have chosen to be with, but hard times have brought you together. And over just being with one another, just living with one another, there's this thing where you rub off on each other. If you're the more Jupiterian one, you may lift the spirits of this dour personality. Or if you happen to be the more dour or serious personality, you may actually give some sort of sense of direction to the more Jupiterian type of personality. What's lovely about the slower moving planets, particularly Jupiter and Saturn, when they have something like a sextile, it can act as what I used to call, there was a commercial for, I think it was called Contact, which was a medicine that you would take. I think it was an anti-allergen or something like this. And they would say, you take this once in the morning, and then time-release capsules are released into your blood system, and it floods through your body. And so you feel throughout the day the effects of this. You don't feel great immediately, but over a period of time through the course of the day, you will feel the effects of these time-release capsules. And it's almost like a time-release capsule is taking place with this Jupiter-Saturn sextile. You may feel like there's nothing you may feel at first, because you've been thrown out of a situation or you've been thrown on hard times. This is awful and I want to get back. And how do I get back in someone's good graces? Or maybe you're feeling more vengeful and how do I get back at someone, who did me wrong? You may be feeling that as well. But as the sextile energy releases, because we have Saturn already in retrograde, Jupiter will turn in retrograde. So they're around each other really for the next 12 months. As the effects of this sextile release, you will start, maybe grudgingly revisiting the situation and grudgingly admitting, well, this person who found me impossible to live with might have been right, or there might have been something to what they were saying, or maybe I wasn't the best person to work with, or maybe that situation that I was trying to make myself fit into wasn't the best fit for me. And so I'm gradually moving beyond a sort of bitterness of having been let go to an openness of accepting that maybe it was a bad situation, this work or this career, and maybe what would be a better fit is if I went in a different direction. So this type of sextile being between a water and an earth sign, it's not going to be ambitious or driven or fast. It's not going to be sensational. It's not going to have the answer, that changes your life. It's not fiery and airy and those sorts of things. It's steady and it's deliberate. And it allows you time, because Saturn is at Pisces, to reflect and to go over what were either missteps on your part or missteps in terms of the situation wasn't going to work, and you coming to an acceptance that it wasn't the best thing for you, and starting to feel more like getting back on your feet and like choosing something which is a better fit for you. Now, The Odd Couple ran from 1970 to 1975, and in real time in the series, and so 5 years pass. With the sextile, we're only talking about one. 5 years pass, and in the end, Gloria takes Felix back. Felix isn't changed, dramatically. He's not like wearing a baseball cap and, a jersey top or anything like that. But he's changed in terms of his sense of humor has come out. There's a gentility that has emerged instead of the rigidity and the sternness. There's an ability to laugh at himself. There's a consciousness of how he can drive people crazy. there's him catching himself when he's ready to correct and just stopping and letting the other person be. And these are things that he's learned in his time out, in this, and Saturn can be these timeout periods. This is what he's learned in his time out friendship and cohabitation with Oscar. So that at the end episode, of course, Gloria, who threw him out at the beginning and handed him the saucepan, has taken him back, and they're going to marry. And you can tell that it's going to be very, very successful. And so they have the marriage, or they have the wedding ceremony, and they're back at the apartment, and Gloria's, headed down the hall, and Felix calls after her and says, wait just one moment, I have something to say to Oscar, and he turns to Oscar, and Oscar's already sort of like undone the tie from the wedding and, pulled the shirt out of the pants trousers and, getting comfortable again. And in that last exchange, Felix turns to Oscar with a huge smile, and he says, your dinner's in the oven, turn it off in 20 minutes. And Oscar, smiles and nods. And he's like, okay, Felix, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. And then Felix suddenly says, and Oscar, I want to salute you. And Oscar's like, okay, what? And Felix goes to Oscar's wastepaper basket. He turns it upside down and he empties its contents on the floor. And it gets an enormous laugh and round of applause from the audience, and both actors, laugh and giggle at the thought of that. And Felix waves goodbye, and he disappears out the door and leaves. And Oscar says, calling after him, and Felix, I'll salute you by cleaning up after the waste paper basket, And Felix laughs as the door closes, and Oscar waves. And Oscar takes a beat and looks down at the waste paper basket and the contents on the ground, and he's like, I'm not going to clean that up. And he goes about his life. It's a wonderful ending to the series, but it's also a wonderful comment on this particular sextile. In this particular sextile, the reason that Pisces and Taurus, a planet in Pisces would be sextiling a planet in Taurus, is that these are both the yin elements, or the feminine elements. Taurus is feminine earth, Pisces is feminine water, and so they complement one another. And it's a very easy way to remember of sextiles between earth and water, because think of a plant, you plant a plant in the soil, you water it, and it grows and flourishes. So that's earth and water together. Or if you need something easier than that to remember, mud. Okay, so earth and water signs will always sextile, just as air and fire signs will always sextile. But the sextile is what we call a separating or departing sextile. Why do we call it that? We call it that because Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Pisces, and Jupiter is in the zodiac sign of Taurus, which means that in terms of the zodiac or the calendar, Jupiter is before or in front. Jupiter in Taurus is before or in front of Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the previous year. We have the beginning of the new agricultural year with Aries, and then we have Taurus, which is a spring sign, or at least it's a spring sign up here in the Northern Hemisphere. So Taurus is in front of Pisces on the zodiacal wheel. Saturn is also the slower moving planet, and it's also just turned retrograde. So Jupiter is ahead of Saturn. Okay, it's not racing ahead, but it's ahead of Saturn. It will turn retrograde and head back, and then it will move forward, but Saturn is always behind Jupiter. So Jupiter is ahead, and it's separating. It's the faster moving planet because it's the planet that's closest to the sun in terms of the orbit of all the different planets. So what you have in a separating sextile is pretty much the planet ahead is waving goodbye as it goes on its way. What they have had in their relationship is that the slower moving planet, in this instance Saturn, has actually been the supportive planet, okay? And like the television series, even though Felix gets on Oscar's nerves all the time, there is a supportive element that Felix has on Oscar, or actually a building element. Oscar becomes a better man and a better worker. He's been undisciplined, and he starts to get raises, and he starts going somewhere in his life because he's had Felix in his corner, who's much more disciplined and much more driven than Oscar has been. So Oscar's really become a better person as a result. They both had that effect on one another. But the Saturn supports the Jupiter in the Taurus. It lifts the sights of the Jupiter and Taurus, where Jupiter and Taurus might go for, this is the typical thing, this is what I just do. the Saturn in Pisces asks Jupiter and Taurus, don't you want more? Don't you want to shoot for more? Don't you want to raise your sights? Where Jupiter and Taurus, and Taurus is really, truly the most optimistic of all the earth signs. It's the one that's least worried or anxious about money. Saturn brings up air of caution. Are you sure that's the best it could be? Are you sure that you examined that thoroughly? Are you sure that you dotted all the I's and crossed the T's? Are you sure that you entertained what could be a worst case scenario? And it would be like, you don't have to be paralyzed by a worst case scenario, but you have to sort of take it into account. And so this is what the Saturn in Pisces can do. But, at the end of the show, Felix has been called back from exile. He remarries his wife and he goes on with his life, and it's understood that it's going to be a happy and a good one. And Jupiter, the Jupiter character, Jack Klugman, Oscar Madison, goes back to his life. And what's wonderful about that is that it's so Jupiter and Taurus that he was happy with the way that he was living anyway. And so he goes back to his life and embraces it. And what we have here is that where Pisces, for instance, which is a tremendously creative zodiac sign, it's the dreamer, it's the visionary, is not always the most productive of the water signs. It can get very much caught up in a dream or a vision of something, but it can lose its ability to produce. That can either be because the dream is so visceral that any sort of physical manifestation of it would be a disappointment, or it can be that the creative urge is so powerful, but it doesn't know how to shape it. It doesn't know how to format it. And what you have when you've got a sextile going on with Taurus is an earth sign. Taurus is very earth. It's earthy, but it's, what do I want to say? It's very results oriented. So the Taurus can show the Pisces how to get it done. Don't treat it like it's the big mystical vision or the best book that's ever been written or the greatest hit that's ever been done that Adele's going to contact you immediately and say, I want to sing this song. It's not that. When you treat a vision as something pristine or larger than life, chances are you don't do anything with it in this life. And so that casual, that relaxed way of being that Taurus can represent can be tremendously beneficial to Pisces, where Saturn in Pisces can maybe be more withholding or more like, I'm not up to this, or I don't know if I can do this. The Jupiter, which is the planet that rules Pisces, remember that planets are in signs and signs are in turn ruled by planets. So Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Pisces. We think of Pisces as being ruled by Neptune, but remember that Pisces' classic ruler, traditional ruler, is Jupiter. So the Jupiter rules the Saturn and brings it forward. So it's Jupiter in Taurus that's really forming the Saturn in Pisces, that's really emboldening the Saturn in Pisces through a Jupiter and Taurus way, which is, don't make it a big deal. Be relaxed about your creativity and what you want to do in your life. Don't treat these life decisions that they're so huge and so larger than life that you're never going to make them or you're never going to act on them. And at the same time, don't do a Pisces meandering down the, I wish I could be a fish, alleyway of fantasy. Take what that dream is and get your hands dirty in the earth, get your hands dirty in the clay and shape and do something with it. It doesn't have to be based on discipline or drive or, whatever. It's get your hands dirty and wet, engage in a creative process and be open to what comes to you tactily through working on a project, a venture, a remodel, a garden, a painting, a song. Commit yourself to creating and building that, and you will. And in many ways, that kind of very casual and relaxed and why not, attitude of Jupiter and Taurus can do a lot more than just ground the Pisces energy. It can show the Pisces energy not only how to create and to build, but also how to live in this world and to have a good time while doing it. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Horoscope Highlights. Please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Your support means a lot. See you next week.